Before they opened the door, no one expected anything unusual. No smell, no sound, no urgency. Just another apartment. Another key turning in a lock. Another quiet end. But what they found wasn't emptiness. It was something far more unsettling. A life that had left no evidence it had ever mattered. No photographs on the walls. No notes taped to the fridge. No letters hidden in drawers. No names circled in address books. Only dust, resting patiently on objects that had been used every day. And in that moment, an uncomfortable question surfaced. A question most people spend their entire lives trying not to ask. If no one notices you are gone, were you ever truly here? The man had lived in this city for decades, paid his bills, showed up to work, nodded politely to neighbors. Yet now, standing inside his apartment, it was clear. His life had passed through the world without disturbing it. He had a name, but names only survive when someone needs to say them. He worked a job that required precision but rewarded invisibility. Invoices, numbers, records, things meant to be correct, not remembered. He arrived on time, left on time, solved problems quietly, and never created one loud enough to carry his memory forward. People trusted him, and then forgot him. At home, everything waited exactly where he left it, as if the room had learned his habits better than any human ever had. The kettle near the stove, the chair pulled back just enough to sit again, a clock marking time, indifferent to whether anyone was listening. The apartment didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like a sentence that ended before reaching its point. He chose a life without friction, not because he feared pain, but because he believed silence was safer than disappointment. He dressed in clothes that belonged to no particular year, spoke in sentences that required no response, lived in a way that asked nothing from others, and therefore received nothing back. To the world, he was reliable background noise. To himself, he was careful. Every morning followed the same structure. Wake, fare, work, return. Structure can feel like control, until it quietly becomes a cage. Sometimes, on his way home, he stopped at a cafe. Always the same one. Always the same seat near the window. He didn't watch people to judge them. He watched them to understand how they moved so easily through choices he avoided. Laughter, arguments, plans spoken out loud. He listened to their lives brush past him, close enough to feel, never close enough to change him. There were moments when he almost stepped forward, almost spoke to the neighbor he passed every morning for 12 years, almost called the relative whose number still lived in his memory, almost said, "Do you want company?" Almost as where his life quietly stayed. On his desk sat a notebook, unused, unmarked. It wasn't forgotten. It was waiting, waiting for the version of him that believed words should be released into the world, not contained. He didn't think of himself as lonely. Loneliness implied desire. He thought of himself as self-contained. But self-containment has a cost. It keeps the damage out and the meaning with it. Years passed, not with milestones, but with consistency. Nothing went wrong enough to demand change. Nothing went right enough to require risk. And this is where many lives quietly disappear. Not in tragedy, not in failure, but in comfort that lasts just long enough to become permanent. He told himself there would be time later. Later to reconnect. Later to speak. Later to be known. Later is a word that sounds generous, until you realize it has no obligation to arrive. In the evenings, he listened to the city through the walls. Footsteps above, voices below, the distant pulse of traffic. Proof that life continued, without requiring him. Sometimes he imagined what it would feel like to be missed. Not admired, not praised, just noticed. He wondered whether meaning required witnesses, or whether it could exist privately, like a well-kept room no one ever enters. He kept a photograph of a coastline he visited once. The ocean had worn the land into smoothness through patience alone. He respected that. He folded an unfinished letter one autumn night. Not dramatic, not desperate, just honest. He never sent it. Completion would have required admitting he wanted something back. And wanting something back meant vulnerability. So he placed the letter in a drawer, along with many other almosts. When the end came, it did not announce itself. no straged, no final confession. Just a quiet moment where the routine stopped continuing. Days passed before anyone noticed. Not because he was unloved, but because he had designed his life to require no interruption. The discovery was efficient, respectful, forgettable. The apartment told more of his story than any person could. A mug with a faint ring at the bottom. Shoes aligned by the door. A notebook missing its first sentence. No one searched for deeper meaning. The system rarely does. Files closed. Space reclaimed. Silence restored. And yet, something remained. Not a legacy. Not a name carved into memory. But a question that lingers long after the room is empty. Is a life only real if it leaves a mark? Or is it enough to have existed with care, even if no one remembers? Every day lives like his end quietly. Not because they lacked value, but because they never demanded attention. They pass beneath the noise of history, between headlines, outside celebration. And maybe that is not a failure. Maybe it is simply another way to be human. But the question remains, and it is not about him. It is about us.